There are 40 days in the Bible that almost no one ever talks about. They begin on Easter Sunday morning, when the tomb is found empty. They end on Ascension Thursday, when Jesus rises into the clouds on the Mount of Olives. 40 days. Almost 6 weeks. The same length of time Jesus spent in the wilderness at the start of his ministry. The same length of time the rain fell on Noah's ark. And in those 40 days, the most extraordinary period in human history was unfolding. The risen Jesus was walking the earth in his glorified body. He was appearing to disciples in locked rooms. He was eating breakfast on the shore of Galilee. But where was Mary? The Bible records dozens of resurrection appearances during these 40 days. It names Mary Magdalene. It names Peter. It names Thomas. It even mentions 500 witnesses at one moment. It never describes a single appearance to his mother. But Christian tradition has been certain for 2,000 years that he came to her first. And what Scripture and tradition tell us about how Mary actually lived those 40 days will change the way you see Easter forever. Start with Easter Sunday morning. The Gospels tell us exactly who went to the tomb at dawn. Mary Magdalene was there. Mary, the wife of Clopas, was there. Salome was there. They went carrying burial spices to anoint the body of Jesus. Mary, the mother of Jesus, was not there. Stop and think about that. The woman who had stood at the foot of the cross watching her son die, the woman who had received his body in her arms when they took him down. That woman did not go to anoint his body on Sunday morning. Why not? Christian writers from the 2nd century onward have given the same answer. Mary did not need to go to the tomb because Mary already knew her son was not there. She was the only person in the world who had completely believed him when he said he would rise on the 3rd day. The other disciples had forgotten. The other women had not understood. Mary had remembered every word. While the other women were walking to a tomb to find a body, Mary was sitting in a small house in Jerusalem, waiting. And tradition tells us that her son came to her first. The Gospels are silent. None of the 4 Gospels record a resurrection appearance to Mary, the mother of Jesus. But the silence itself is the evidence. St. Ambrose, writing in the 4th century, said it plainly. Mary saw the resurrection of the Lord. She was the first who saw and believed. St. John Paul II, 2,000 years later, said the same thing. It is reasonable to think that the mother was probably the first person to whom the risen Jesus appeared. Why are the Gospels silent? Because, in the words of one early church father, what passes between a son and his mother needs no public witness. Picture the scene as tradition describes it. It is still dark. The sun has not yet risen on Easter Sunday. Mary is sitting in a small upper room in Jerusalem. She's not weeping. She's not asleep. She's waiting. Then a presence fills the room. She turns. He's standing in front of her. Different. Glorified. The wounds in his hands and feet visible but no longer bleeding. His face the same face she had seen since he was a baby. His voice the same voice she had heard say, "Mama," in a Nazareth kitchen. Tradition does not record what they said. Maybe nothing. Maybe just a long embrace in the gray pre-dawn light of an upper room. Maybe just her hand on his face, her fingers tracing the place where the crown of thorns had been pressed into his forehead 2 days earlier. Maybe just one word, the word she had been saying since he was an infant. Or maybe he simply said, "Mama, I am here." Whatever passed between them, when the disciples burst into the upper room later that morning to tell her the tomb was empty, Mary already knew. She did not run to the tomb. She did not gather spices. She did not weep with joy. She had already seen him. Subscribe right now if you want to follow her through every one of the 40 days. Because what she did during those days is the part of Easter no one ever teaches. Now picture where she lived during those 40 days. She was not in Nazareth, she was in Jerusalem. From the cross onward, she had been living in the house of John the Apostle. John chapter 19, verse 27. From that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. John was the youngest of the apostles. He had stood at the foot of the cross when most of the others had run. Jesus had given Mary into his care, and John had taken the responsibility seriously. His house was somewhere in Jerusalem, probably in the upper city. We do not know exactly where, but it became the home base of the early church for the next 40 days. Mary was the center of that house. Imagine the daily rhythm. The disciples would come and go. Peter, James, Andrew, Thomas. They were terrified. They were confused. They had seen the risen Jesus by now, but they did not know what to do next. They came to John's house to talk, to pray, to eat, to make sense of what was happening. And every time they came, Mary was there, cooking, listening, praying with them, reminding them of the things her son had said. She was already doing what she would do for the rest of her life. She was holding the church together. Now feel what she was teaching them in those 40 days. She was not teaching theology. She was not preaching. She was not giving sermons. She was teaching them how to wait. She had spent her entire life waiting. She had waited 9 months for his birth. She had waited 18 silent years for his ministry to begin. She had waited 3 hours at the foot of the cross. She had waited 3 days for the resurrection. Now she taught the apostles the same skill. When Peter came in afraid, Mary listened. She did not panic with him. She had been afraid before. She knew that fear passed if you held still long enough. When Thomas came in doubting, Mary listened. She did not argue with him. She had felt the sword Simeon had warned her about. She knew doubt was not the opposite of faith. When John was confused about what to do next, Mary listened. She had been confused herself many times in her life. She had simply trusted that God was doing something. She taught them, by the rhythm of her own life, that waiting on God is not passive. It is the most active thing a human can do. And during those 40 days, her son kept appearing. He appeared to the 11 disciples in the upper room. He appeared to Thomas a week later. He appeared to 7 disciples on the shore of the Sea of Galilee at dawn, cooking breakfast over a charcoal fire. He appeared to over 500 people at one time, according to St. Paul. Mary was not at most of these appearances. Tradition tells us that after the first appearance to her on Easter Sunday morning, her son did not need to keep showing himself to her. She believed, but she watched what was happening to the others. She watched John come home with a different face. She watched Peter come home and not know what to say. She watched the apostles slowly stop being afraid. Her son was preparing them. For 40 days, he was teaching them, blessing them, eating with them, restoring them. Restoring Peter especially. 3 times Peter had denied him. 3 times the risen Jesus would ask Peter, "Do you love me?" On the shore of Galilee, healing the wound. Mary watched it all happen. From John's house in Jerusalem, from the upper room, from the kitchen. She had raised the man who was now restoring 11 other men. On the 40th day, Jesus came to John's house in the morning. He gathered his disciples one last time. He told them to walk with him out of Jerusalem, east, across the Kidron Valley, up the slope of the Mount of Olives. Mary went with them. She did not have to be told. She had been walking with him her entire life. The first time she had carried him on a road had been the road to Bethlehem. The second time had been the road to Egypt. She had walked behind him on the road to Calvary at age 33. Now she walked behind him on the road to the Mount of Olives. The 40 days were ending. She knew it. She did not say anything. She did not weep. She just walked. She had said goodbye to her son 3 times in her life. The day he left Nazareth at age 30. The day he died on the cross. And now today, on a mountain just east of Jerusalem. She had been preparing for this morning since the angel had first come to her in Nazareth, 46 years earlier. Step back, see what nobody tells you about those 40 days. They were not Jesus's days. They were Mary's. The Gospels record his appearances, his teachings, his meals with the disciples. But the daily rhythm of those 40 days, the cooking and the listening and the holding it all together, the upper room where the disciples kept coming and going, all of that was Mary's work. Every Christian who has ever lit a candle during a difficult season is keeping the vigil Mary kept in those 40 days. Every parent who has ever held a family together in the middle of grief and confusion is repeating what Mary did in John's house. Every believer who has ever waited for an answer that did not come quickly is following the rhythm Mary taught the apostles in the upper room. She did not write a book. She did not give a sermon. She did not perform a miracle. She just held the church together for 40 days while her resurrected son finished his work on earth. If this changed how you see the days between Easter and the Ascension, subscribe. Share this with someone who has been the quiet center of a family or a church and never been told that what they do matters more than they know. And tell me, what hit you hardest? Her first meeting with her risen son? The waiting in John's house? Or the moment you realized those 40 days were Mary's days too? I read every comment. I will see you in the next one.